Okay, it's my honor to welcome such a full house of fresh new faces. I know some people here, but I think most of the faces here today. Pat Jameson. Shh. I know enough people to call them out when they're talking in class. I'm really happy to see you all here. My name is Marilyn Marler, and I am the executive director here at the Montana Natural History Center. We are a almost 35-year-old nonprofit whose mission is to connect people of all ages and all backgrounds with nature. And we're really happy to have you. A lot of people said they didn't know we were here, and I hope you'll come back. We have a lot of evening programmings and weekend programmings all fall. So hop on the website after tonight and come back and see us. And if you have grandkids, we have little kid programs too. It's not all lectures and books. After the event, you can buy a book and have it signed by the authors. Other housekeeping is that the restrooms are through the art gallery and by the water fountain. I feel like that's all the housekeeping things. And Allison, you're good setting up the slide of the map of the Bob Marshall. All right. I'd also like to introduce our media coordinator, Allison DeYoung, just wave. She does our magazine. Allison is also the brains behind Field Notes, the radio program that you hear on Montana Public Radio. We do so many exciting things. I'm very proud to be a part of this. Without further ado, I would like, and a big thank you to MCAT for recording this tonight and sharing it through their various outlets. We really appreciate having them do that for us, and it doesn't cost us anything, and we're so glad to have them. So how about a quick round of applause for MCAT and all they do? All right, I would love to introduce tonight's speakers with their book, The Hush of the Land. First is Eva-Maria Maggi. And she has a PhD in political science, and she teaches wilderness policy at the University of Montana, and she teaches packing at the University of Montana, which I think is a really cool combination. I know that she's published at least one other book in addition to this book, and the other was called The Will of Change, which shares her research on political science in Europe and the Middle East. She grew up in Germany. She has lived a lot of places. She speaks 4 languages, and the most impressive of her accomplishments, although the packing and the 2 books and the 4 languages are all pretty great, she is a certified master naturalist, and that is that's a program that we offer here at the Montana Natural History Center. So thank you for repping us in your author bio. Thanks for joining us. And Smoke Elser needs no introduction. He seriously is a legend in Montana. I just want to say that quickly. Smoke was born in Ohio, eventually made it out to Montana, graduated from the University of Montana, University of Montana, and then built his legendary career as an outfitter in the Bob Marshall. And that is what we're here to talk about. So I'm going to give this microphone back to Smoke with my biggest gratitude. Thank you so much. And thank you all.
You know, I'd like to, first of all, thank everybody for coming. You know, I know it's hot evening and everybody's got something else to do. So don't forget that. Thank you all for coming. Thank you.
Test, test. Oh, yeah, perfect. Okay, that's much better. Hello, thank you also for coming. This is really exciting because Natural History Center has been very special for me for a while, pretty much since I moved to Montana. And this is really where I rediscovered my love for creative writing. So my first piece that I wrote after years of academic research and doing my PhD, and it all kind of killed my joy in writing, really. I wrote a field note when I did my natural history, my master naturalist class, and it was on why is bird poop white? And I wrote that because I had a pandemic walk with my daughter along the Clark Fork, And we were kind of looking around, and I got so excited about all these new things I was learning in class, and so I shared it with her. And she looked around and like saw all these birds, and she was like, it was at Council Grove, and she was like, oh, Mom, I really wonder why bird poop is white. And I said, I have no idea. And so I looked it up, and I had so much fun. So thank you, Allison, for doing that. And that really kind of showed me that I can actually write pretty fun things in a language I didn't grow up with. My PhD is in English, but of course it's not a language I grew up with. So it was very empowering and a very fun experience. So it's special to be here with this book, Hush of the Land and with Smoke. We have been doing these events the past year and a half. I think it was around now 25 events we did all over Montana. And it has been really special to meet so many people that obviously have no idea who I am, and I don't really count really in those conversations. It's usually Smoke, and it's so special because I spent 8 years with him at his barn, recording his stories, over 800 hours of his stories, and I really did not know who he was when I started it. So when I moved to Missoula, I mainly moved here for my job and my husband. And I thought, well, I was already into the horse world. I was packing mules, but I really didn't know what I was doing. And so I thought, I should really take a class. And I signed up for Smoke's class because I heard of him through the Backcountry Horseman. And then I found out, he's my neighbor. And so I started, I thought, this is great. I can just walk to his barn. And his barn, who has been to his barn yet? Okay, those who did not should totally do it. I think it's like from my research, what I found, it's one of the, if not the oldest still standing building in the Rattlesnake Valley here north of Missoula. And it's beautiful, but when I walked there, kind of from Germany, I lived a little bit all over the world, but when I walked to this barn, I really felt like, oh my God, this looks like home. There's these huge boulders that Glacier Lake Missoula deposited, and then people just picked up from the valley floor to build this apple storage, what it was at the beginning. And it's like halfway built into the hill. It has a perfect temperature year-round, very nice in the summer. And it's exactly like the old barns we have in Germany. So when I walked in, I had the smell of leather and horses and sweat, and I was like, oh my God, this is so nice. So I really felt at home, and I started learning how to pack from Smoke here, but also from Jeff Miller, who also made this wonderful map right here. Jeff was one of, if not the first Wrangler Smoke ever had. Hold up your hand. Yeah, right here, Jeff. So those two taught me how to pack a mule, and I got really infected by that mule packing virus. But especially, Smoke does this special thing. Who took his class, his packing class, mule and horse packing class? You did, yeah, well, you taught it. So he taught this class to thousands of people all across the country. So not only university students, but everybody, every adult that wanted to take it, but also the National Park Service, U.S. Forest Service, U.S. Navy SEALs. There were a lot of people that took that class. And he has a special secret how to teach. And I was not able to really recreate that yet. But he peppers in, like he shows you a knot or something to put the saddle on or something like that. It's all fairly complicated if you're not used to it. And then he peppers in this story, this amazing story of like, oh yeah, that time when I went down the trail and that grizzly jumped out. A little bit like that, but even more, like it really deepens what you learn. So you kind of transport it into this different world around the campfire or somewhere in the Bob Marshall. And I knew when I heard that first story, like deep in my heart, I needed to record these things. Like, I needed to somehow preserve them and have them available for people. So we started out. And from that, the idea of a book really slowly developed. So it wasn't my idea from the beginning. I was way too scared of him. I was like, if he would just let me record his stories, it's a huge deal, right? You let somebody into his life and into your life. And so I then slowly, I think after a year or two, probably, and we have different versions of this story, my recollection is that I walked up to him and I said, oh, maybe, don't you think we could put this in a book because they're so good. These stories are so good. Anyway, and so 8 years later, we made it happen. And I'm so grateful that I had the time, and I still do have the time. I still hear stories. We probably could write 3 more books, I would think. That I was so lucky that I was able to write these stories up for him and for everybody else. And so these events are really important and special because I feel like I can share this love for the stories with you through the book. But of course, you can also listen to what I was able to listen to for 8 years around the campfire, or actually next to the wood stove. So I know you're not here to listen to me talk, but I will read you a little bit of a prologue, or actually the entire prologue, which is not very long, of the book, because it gives you a really nice introduction of who Smoke is and what outfitting actually means. So I think a lot of people that come to Montana and they kind of hear about these horses you can take into the Bob Marshall and what are these people that are doing it. I think it's a nice introduction to the profession of an outfitter that Smoke perfected, I would say, over the 60 years he and Thelma ran their business. And then afterwards, I give it all to Smoke, and he will tell a lot of stories, and you can ask all your questions. Great, okay. The next turn in the trail is the door into a different world. Oh, by the way, I should probably mention, the way that I wrote this is very unusual, right? So I didn't write this as a biography. I wrote that from Smoke's perspective. So it's written as a memoir, as if Smoke would tell it. Okay. So the next turn in the trail is the door into a different world. The sky is bigger and bluer, the rocks dark and steep, the river roars with white foam. I'm riding above the North Fork of the Blackfoot River at 3 miles an hour. It is a clear summer day in our first stretch of an 8-day trip through the Bob Marshall Wilderness in Montana. 1.5 million acres of roadless land, home to elk, moose, lynx, wolves, and the grizzly bears, and the 3rd largest wilderness area in the country. A family from the city rides behind me. My crew, with the pack mules carrying our food and gear, follow closely behind on the narrow trail above the water. After this turn, the canyon opens up. The green is fresh with a few mature trees, but most were burned by wildfire years ago. Though it's seemingly wild, many people have traveled this trail before us. Gold miners to find their luck, trappers to find the beaver, homesteaders to build a town, and before all of them, the Salish and Blackfeet people to reach their ancestral fishing and hunting grounds. Soon we will cross Smoke's Bridge and stop for lunch by the foundation of the old cabin right by the river. And I will tell the story of the man who once lived here, hiding from the U.S. Marshal. The guests won't ask many questions or call their horses lovingly by their names. Not yet. But tomorrow they will. And once their awe turns into love for the land, they will thank their horses each Christmas with a card and a box of carrots for bringing them here. My name is Smoke Elser, and I spent 57 years working as an outfitter and guide, bringing thousands of people deep into the wilderness of Montana on horses and mules. This wilderness is true wild country. Cars can't travel through because there are no roads. People can't stay in a hotel because there are no permanent structures. Since the Wilderness Act of 1964, 111 million acres have been set aside in the United States to be left untrammeled by humans. A place for animals to live, rivers to flow free, and mountains to be kept intact from drilling and mining. Keeping this land wild was a big challenge back then, as it is today. I know it because I was there when the first wilderness areas were set aside, and I have stood up to keep it that way every day since. The Bob Marshall Wilderness has a special place in my heart. It is my spiritual home, my cathedral, and my favorite way to travel it is on a horse and with a mule. Because they carry our food and gear, we can stay longer, travel further, and connect deeper to the land around us. At 3 miles an hour and 5 feet off the ground, everybody can truly experience wilderness. The busy city people, the old and the young, even those who can't walk. Sitting on a horse, my guests have time to look around and can wonder about the 1,000-foot-high limestone cliff, the white cone-shaped flowers sprouting from the forest floor, and the strangely familiar animals that they might spot on a meadow just across the river, but only know from pictures. Then I tell them about the sedimentary rock that lifted up thousands of years ago along the Continental Divide, the bear grass that blooms only every 7 years, and the moose that likes to feed in the marshy wetland, and they see the land around them with different eyes. My guests always ask about grizzly bears, and I tell them the story of when I got treated by one with a collar, or when my horse chased off another during the night. The Bob Marshall is perfect for horse travel. Its many valleys can be accessed by just a few high mountain passes. Grass for the horses and mules is plentiful, and the fishing is outstanding. To know where to camp, to provide food and shelter, that was my job. I came to Montana as a young boy from Ohio, fresh out of high school in 1955. Couldn't ride a horse or pack a mule, met the love of my life and never left. A blind man taught me to listen. A teacher turned outfitter taught me to speak up, and his cousin showed me how to pack my first mule. I met many great horses and even better mules, and had the best crew anyone could wish for, all of them both curious and smart. As an outfitter, I brought thousands of people from all walks of life into the wilderness. Bankers from New York, pioneering grizzly bear researchers, dairy farmers from Wisconsin, gas station attendants, riders, and elders from the Salish tribe. Even more, I taught numerous students how to pack a mule or a horse in my old stone barn with the red doors in Missoula, Montana. Everybody looks for something different in life, seeks fulfillment and strives, but in the woods, we all long for solitude, the quiet in our otherwise busy lives. People find peace in their connection to nature. And that is why I always collect my guests' watches before we leave the trailhead. Without watches, they can let go of the time in their worlds and fully live in the slower rhythm of the land. Together we travel, and they don't have to worry about where to find food or shelter. My crew and I take care of that. And at night, after dinner around the campfire, I tell them the stories of the land that I had heard, and some that had happened to me. Stories bring us closer, connect us deeper to the world around us. And my stories travel home with them, and my love for the Bob Marshall Wilderness becomes their love for the land. Thank you.
Well, again, thank you everybody for being here, but I'm going to hand the mic over to her for a minute. I want to show you something. For some reason or other, this museum sent some young students to me this year, and they sent me thank you cards.
Yeah, so
How about
sweet.
that?
Yeah.
And not only that, but they sent one for Gracie, that's the horse, one for Sarah, and that's the mule, and one for me, and Eva.
Yeah.
So I thank you guys for doing that. I love to teach kids. That's what we're doing now. Jeff and I get at it, and we teach young people. Thank you. And by the way, I can't talk without my hat on, so I apologize, but I'm going to put my hat back on. It's getting a little thin in here up there anyway. Okay, yeah, I'd like to tell you some stories about the Bob Marshall, but I'm amazed at how many people showed up here. Geez, you should be out water skiing and using your boat and all that kind of stuff. But I'll try to tell you some interesting stories about the Bob Marshall. One of the first ones I would tell you is one with Dr. Craighead. Dr. Craighead, you know, is a renowned grizzly bear expert. And he started a study in Yellowstone Park in about 1960 and ran that for 3 years. And then for some reason, after he studied the bears a little bit, and I went down there and studied them with him. I was in college at that time. He asked for a volunteer that wanted to go down in Yellowstone and earn 10 credits, which I was interested in. And I didn't have to do much work, and I liked to be outside. So anyway, I went down there with him, and we collared some bears. But after the 3 years, the Park Service got kind of mad at him because he made recommendations of how to keep that park running smoothly without very many accidents with bears, and how to keep the bears happy also. And he gave them a long book of recommendations, And immediately they said, well, you're out. We don't want to do that. Instead, they were throwing their garbage out in about 5 different places in the park. And we would take an old 4-door Plymouth car that they abandoned, the Park Service did, and we used it to go collar our bears. But the thing of it is that they never sell anything. And that old car was a 1938 Plymouth of all cars. And the back doors, opened this way, so that which is kind of handy with bears. But at any rate, we did study some bears there, put some collars on them, and then they kicked him out of there. So he was looking for another place to do that study. And what he did is he contacted the outfit down in Texas that does all the satellite work. And he contacted them, and they said, yeah, what we'd like to do is we need to be able to fly our satellites over the world and determine what kind of habitat that everybody needs, that everybody, humans and everywhere else. And of course, right away, the military were real interested, and NASA was also very interested. And they said, well, how can we do this? Well, he located a mountain, which I'm quite familiar with, which is called Scapegoat Mountain. And it's a big mountain that has a plateau on the top that's about 5 miles long and about 3 miles wide. And it's pretty flat up there, although rolling hills, but nothing serious. And there was water up there. So he picked that spot, and NASA flew their satellites around and went over that a number of times and took pictures of it. And finally, by golly, in 1972, I packed John and some researchers, university students, into the hills and up to Scapegoat Mountain. In our first trip, John wanted to make some money. He needed to get some money to run the outfit, So he contacted a group back in Pittsburgh called the Mellon Foundation. And they had lots of money to give out, lots of money. So anyway, we took 5 Mellon family people. Actually, 2 of them were cousins, direct cousins, and knew the Mellon Foundation very well. We took them into the hills and went up the North Fork of the Blackfoot, that same river that she was talking about, and then turned and went up the Dry Fork about 4 miles to Cabin Creek, went up Cabin Creek to the end till it hit the mountain. And there I set up camp, and the first night we stayed in that camp, but the second night we wanted to go up on the Scapegoat. We wanted to go up there. And, I know how to get a horse up there because I've led people up there on horseback about 4 or 5 times, but the Forest Service never liked it, and I didn't particularly like it because the second time I went up there, I saw horseshoe marks. That isn't supposed to be on top of the mountain. So I tried not to take very many people up there and show them that route. Matter of fact, I got 2 routes that I can take up there with a horse. But at any rate, we camped at the head of Cabin Creek, and there's no horse trail that goes up there. I knew that. And so what we had to do is carry our gear to the top of the mountain. They wanted to go up and see what it really looked like on the top. So all of the Mellon Foundation people, they got their little backpacks, that weighed about 15 pounds, maybe, and left all the rest of the gear down in the bottom so I could pack it up, which I did. And so the first day first day that we had at Cabin Creek, we laid over there, and then the second day we started up the trail. And there's a way you can get up there. You just have to switch back and follow a lot of little ledges to go up the mountain. But at any rate, we did that, followed that all the way up, and John kept telling stories about the Bob Marshall and what we should be doing and how we should be protecting the bears. Maybe we protected them too much now, but I'm not sure. Somebody has to figure that out because we don't have John around anymore, or Frank, his twin brother. But at any rate, we get up on top of the mountain, and we set up a little camp in a crumhold. A crumhold is a group of trees, spruce trees generally, and they don't grow more than about 15, 20 feet high at the most. And they're real wiry little trees that handle the snow and everything else. But anyway, we set up camp in there, and John and the Millen family, they went way off about 150 yards away from where the kitchen was. And I slept fairly close to the kitchen because we want to have food there. And if a bear got in there and ate all the food, we wouldn't have any food. So I stayed pretty close there. And the first day, we just looked around in the general area. Walked around and looked at the springs. There's a lot of little springs up there, that rivulets. And we came across one of them, and it had a little pile of rock of chert, this is a limestone mountain. There isn't any chert in a limestone mountain, by the way, but the little pile about that high. And by sorting through it a little bit, I found that it was arrowheads, broken arrowheads. The Native Americans would go to the top of Scapegoat and sit up there by those little streams where they had water, where it was cool, and not many insects at all, because they're up high. And they would stay up there and make arrowheads. And I've got about 6 or 8 of the broken ones that I kept, unfortunately. But at any rate, we found those and found some other things there. We found 3 airplanes, one of them, which was not reported ever. It crashed in the top of a Scapegoat, and the only way we found it was that its tail section had broken off, but it blowed down and under some crumbled trees there, so you couldn't see it at all. But the motor was just sitting there. And we got to looking around, and here I found a light over here and a light over there, and that was the wingtips, and the plane had burned up completely. Another plane that crashed up there was a preacher and his wife and his son and daughter-in-law, and they were flying from Great Falls to Seattle to do some kind of a religious ceremony over there. And they had a plane full of books, hymnals. I mean, a lot of them, not just 2 or 3, but a lot of them. Anyway, they tried to fly across there, and they got caught on the Scapegoat and crashed there too. And the hymnals were laying all around the ground there for an area as big as this building. And the airplane, by the way, the motor's still sitting there to this day. And I always, whenever I go up there, I check the oil. It's full. It's still full. So it's still there. But at any rate, and there's several other planes. There's a B-24 too that crashed there during World War II. And only the turret rings are left. They flew everything out from there. But at any rate, the next day, John says, let's go look and see if we can get over to Half Moon Park. He said, I'd like to have you look down into Half Moon Park. And that's on the west side, or east side of the mountain. So we started hiking, and John says, you bring up the rear, Smoke, and I'll lead them, and we'll talk about it as we go. And that's what we did. We started talking about all the trees and different things that we're seeing. And we went for about, a half a mile, and by golly, we kicked up a bird. And it was a grouse, but it was a real unusual grouse, one of those ones that lives up in Canada. Yeah, we kicked him up. There's almost none around this part of the country. Anyway, we walked and followed it around a little bit, and pretty soon we kept hiking, and Don was showing us different places on the mountain that would be interesting. We saw about 10 goats up there on a little ridge out on the mountain, and came to a big hole in the ground. The water, because of this limestone, the water creates holes, caves actually. And we came to one that was about 10, 12 feet in diameter, and I laid on my belly and looked down in there. Couldn't see the bottom, so I went and got my flashlight out of my pack and shined it, and way down in the bottom there, I could see a funny looking thing. I didn't know what it was. So eventually, we lowered one of the kids, actually, that were with the Millen Foundation, with a rope that was pretty good. Not real good. But anyway, we lowered him down in there, and we brought out a sheep horn, a real big sheep horn in there. So that was one of the things that we found. Anyway, we kept going, walking towards Half Moon Park and the top of Scapegoat, actually, the very top of Scapegoat Mountain. As we walked along, we were talking about different trees and flowers. There's lots of biscuit root up there. That's what bears eat primarily, on the top of the mountain in particular, and a lot of grasses. They eat all kinds of grasses. But anyway, we saw places where they were dug up, and John says, yeah, the bears are up here. And by the way, the scapegoat, he determined that the scapegoat was, excuse me, was kind of the hub of a big wheel where a lot of bears come out of the valleys and spent their summers on the top of the mountain in different families of bears. Anyway, we went along for a ways, and pretty soon we heard some rocks rolling on a scree. A scree is when ice and freezing temperatures and water break up a cliff and make, instead of big rocks, little rocks. And they're just kind of fine gravel rocks, although these were about the size of a watermelon, and maybe a little smaller. But anyway, we heard the noise up there and looked up real quick, and there was a mother grizzly bear. She weighed about 450 pounds. That's what John estimated. Everybody, wants to think that grizzlies weigh thousands of pounds. They don't. They're that big. But they are big, and they do have big claws. But at any rate, we heard the scree rumble a little bit and looked up. John says, everybody, don't move. Don't make any moves now. Just stand still. And, of course, everybody did because they were too scared to do anything else. Here the mother had 2 cubs with her. And the first little cub, she ran up behind the mother right away, was kind of looking out between her legs and seeing what we were. But the other cub, he turned around and come right down the hill about, they were only about 60 yards away, by the way, about from here to the front of the building from us. And we had no trees to climb, by the way. The tallest tree was there, right there, about 5-6 feet, and you couldn't have climbed it anyway. But at any rate, this little cub, he come around and started right down towards us. John says, "Don't move, don't say anything, everybody. Now, don't holler, just keep quiet." We all stood there, froze to the ground, and this little bear come down to within about 20 yards of us and stood up. And John says, "Just don't move now, don't move anything." And finally, the little cub, the mother made a grunt or two, and the little cub dropped down on his feet and went back up the mountain, fortunately. And so did she. She turned and then went over the ridge, and we never saw her again at all. And anyway, John, we went on a little ways further, and John says, "Okay, everybody can sit down." Most of us had to find a tree real quick. But at any rate, we sat down, and John told us a story about that bear in particular. He said, that's about a 450-pound bear. And this is probably her first, maybe her second batch of cubs. They have cubs every 2 years, by the way. And that was a male cub that came down. He was going to defend his mother no matter what. The female went around behind her and watched us. So that was kind of an interesting thing. And then we got over to, of course, the edge of Half Moon Park and looked down in there and saw some elk, but that's about all. We saw a lot of deer up there. And the bird that we saw, we kept following it. That bird would fly only about 60 feet and then land. And it was a ptarmigan. And I don't know of any other place there's ptarmigan in Montana anyway, and I've been to a lot of the top of a lot of mountains. Glacier Park, yes, yeah. Further north, they have ptarmigan. But anyway, a real pretty bird, and we studied that for a while too. But anyway, that was one of the trips that we went on in the Bob Marshall. Now, I'm going to tell you another story, a little different maybe. When I first started into the Bob Marshall, which was in 1957, that was my first trip into the Bob Marshall, I worked for a guy by the name of Tom Edwards, the Whitetail Ranch. And Tom was an old-timer there. He bought a ranch there in the 30s and started a dude ranch. He was actually a teacher in Helena. He taught English and art. But anyway, he was a little short fellow with glasses, and he started his guest ranch. And so I saw him coming out of the hills. The way I met him is that I had a job when I worked for the Forest Service. I started working for the Forest Service as soon as I got out here because I had applied for a job. My shop teacher, I wasn't very smart in school, so I liked shop real well. That was one of my majors. And anyway, my shop teacher hooked me up with a ranger who had done the CCC camps at 9 Mile, of all places, and Bill Fallis. And so I got a job. I wrote a letter and finally got a job, and my teacher helped me get that job. So I drove out here to Montana. 2 other friends of mine, we spent all our senior year, all our spare time, fixing up an old car, a 1939 Chevrolet 4-door, which was all but wrecked. It was bought by my friend's dad before World War II, and he just parked it in the barn. And there it sat, and there it sat until we came out here in 1955. So it was all covered with hay, and the doors were broken and everything else. Tires were all flat. Anyway, we blew them up and brought it home. And we worked on that car all winter. Put new brakes on it, new tires, and overhauled the engine a good bit. Not quite as good as it should have been, but pretty good. And then on our graduation out of high school in 1955, the 3 of us got in that car. We had a party up at where we worked on the car, and we all got in this. 3 of us got in this car and headed for Montana. And it took us 5 days to get here because the car wouldn't go very fast, and we had a lot of trouble. But anyway, we finally got to Helena, Montana, where I had a job, and I went to work right away, and I was on a lookout, on hogback lookout. Has anyone ever been on a lookout? Have you been in a lookout over this? What's that? Yep. Well, guess what? I was the first time that I ever been on a lookout, and they took me up there to the hogback and told me there's a little chair right there with 4 insulators on the bottom, and there's a stool there with 4 more insulators, and whenever you see the lightning come, you better put your feet on there and sit in that chair. So I thought, well, I've seen lightning storms before. But about 4 or 5 days after I was up there, why, here comes a black cloud, and I mean, it was black, and it surrounded the lookout completely. I couldn't see out the windows at all. It was all cloud. I was in the cloud, and lightning was hitting the lookout left and right, and I was holding on to my stool as tight as I could, and had my feet on it, and saw bolts of lightning hit the stove a couple of 3 times inside the lookout. And they told me as soon as it quits lightning, count to about 5. That means it's about 5 miles away. You could probably go outside then, but don't go too far away from the lookout. So at 5, when I counted to 5 and the lightning storm was that far away, I went outside, and we had a water barrel on each corner of the lookout. And I started dipping water and throwing it on the roof because the lightning had caused the roof to catch fire on all 4 corners. And the roofs are always shingles, just cedar shingles. And so I had to put the lookout on. But at any rate, I worked there for 1 full year. And the next year I came back. I came out and got the same job. And at this time I wanted to be on a trail crew. I wanted to be down on the ground. Heck with that tall stuff. But at any rate, I started working for Cloyce Mann. He was one of the foremans there. And the first job, well, I did a lot of, you take a lot of training. You go to first aid, you go to driver's training, you go to all this training, safety of all those. And you learn how to put out a fire and all that stuff. But anyway, about the middle of the summer, he came over to me and he said, listen, the forest supervisor, his name is Dunk Moyer. He wants to go in and look at his land. That is the land that he manages, which is the Canyon Ferry Ranger District and the Helena National Forest. So he said he wants to go in there, and he loves to ride his horse. And there's his horse right over there. And his horse's name is Seabiscuit. Seabiscuit with a number 3 horseshoe? Not really. But you couldn't catch that horse. That horse was really wise. So I had to sit out in the corral for about 2 or 3, 4 or 5 days, more like it, and just read a book and let that horse get used to me and come up. And finally, he got up close enough I could hand him some pellets and hand him a little grain and get used to him. And finally, I could catch him. And my job was to take one of those old International 1-ton trucks, single axle in the back, not duals, and I had 4-wheel drive, but it had a stock rack on the back and a gate that dropped down. So my job was to take Seabiscuit, Dunk's favorite horse, and take it around to all the trailheads so that he could see all of the forests that he managed. And I think that was pretty good for a forest supervisor to do that. I don't think they even get out of the office these days. You know, I don't think they don't have any working boots. And anyway, he would come out and get on that horse, ride around a little bit, and get used to it. And then he'd go on these trips. And one of them was with the Helena Wilderness Riders, and they went in at Benchmark. So I had to haul Seabiscuit over there and dump him out and get the saddle on and tighten everything up for him. And Dunk would get on, and away they'd go. And they were gone for about 7 or 8 days. Finally, they came out at Beaver Creek at Lincoln. And the end of the road there, the Beaver Creek, I drove up there to pick up Seabiscuit so I could take him back home. So here I am sitting at the end of the road. And here comes a pack string of about 20 head of horses. Tom Edwards didn't like mules at all, but he liked horses. And they rolled out to the end of the road, and he was unpacking and getting them all squared around. And here comes the guests later, about 10 or 12 of them, 13 of them. And they come out, and they were all thankful to be out and had fresh water there to drink and all that. And Tom was over there busy unmanning. So I went over to Tom and I said, "Hey, how about a job? I want to do that kind of work." And he said, "Look, Sonny, I don't have time to talk to you." He said, "You're going to have to come up there this winter." And I said, "Where?" "To the Whitetail Ranch." He said, "You ask anybody in Missoula, they'll know where the ranch is. It's at the end of Clansford Flats." So I waited until about January and drove an old, out of Ovando, by the way. Anyway, I had an old 4-door Ford car, 1953, and I started driving up there, and I got up there to where it turns off, and I drove up just a couple of miles, and pretty soon the snow was above the car. I mean, it was 5, 6 feet high, and just one way to go, the only way, and I don't know how I was going to turn around or anything else at the other end. But I finally did get to the Whitetail and talked to Tom, and Tom hired me. He said, "Listen, I want you," he said, "I don't know you very well, but I kind of like you." And he said, "You work for me for 2 weeks, no pay." He said, "I'll feed you and give you a bed to sleep in, but that's all. And you're going to just have to learn and work with me. And if I like you, I'll hire you." Well, in 2 weeks, I was hired, and from that time on, I made $400 a month. And boy, that was good money. Big money in those days, you know. But anyway, I went to the hills. And one of our first trips, we went into Meadow Creek Lake. And that's in the Lincoln Scapegoat now, but at that time it was not. It was in National Forest land. But anyway, we'd pack in our gear in there. And we did that many times. The first 2 horses that I packed was Lonesome and Troubles. And they were exactly what they were. Big, lonesome, and troubles. But at any rate, we went into the hills right there, and I went in with Tom many times after that. And I worked for the Whitetail Ranch for 7 years. And about the 3rd year, Tom Edwards took on his cousin as a partner. And his cousin was Howard Copenever. And Howard was a mule man. He knew mules inside out. I mean, he was good. And Helen, Tom's wife, cooked for Tom all the time, and I was just a packer. Well, Howard, he didn't have anybody to cook for him, so I was a cook and packed just the kitchen string. So that was my job, to go into the hills. And one of our first trips that we went in with just Tom Edwards in 1957, we loaded up a lot of stuff because we set up a summer fishing camp in there all the time. And the fishing camp was right on the lake. And we'd build rafts out of about 5 or 6 logs, stick them together with a few nails and a stick or two, and you could push yourself all the way around the lake because it wasn't that deep. It had deep springs in the middle of the lake, so it didn't freeze. But the fishing was excellent. You could catch fish every day. But anyway, we went in. As we went in that first day, this was in late June. Of course, hit a little snow on the top of Huckleberry Pass. And as we dropped down, we got down to the meadow and got into the first meadow. And just beyond it, Tom hollered back, he says, "Smoke, find your gear in that duffel bag right there that's hanging on that horse." And he said, "Get your gear out of there and take that tent and throw it over there in the trees right there." And I said, "Okay." I didn't know what was going to happen, but anyway, I did, and we went on down to the lake about 2 more miles. And came to the lake and started setting up wall tents for our summer guests. And about just before dark, we had supper. And Tom says, "Okay, you go back out and set up that tent where you put your duffel, and we're going to let you ride out there, and you're going to keep the horses in the valley because he'll go home otherwise. And they could go right over the ridge and right back to the Whitetail Ranch easy." So that was my job. I would saddle up a good horse. Keno was the horse I rode a lot. And I'd ride. Somebody's buzzing for me. But at any rate, I got on Keno, and I'd ride down to the end of the lake and beyond to where my tent was. I set up the tent and got my gear all straightened around, and then I'd picket that horse. That's where you tie one front foot to a long rope and put a pin in the ground. And that's how they graze. So there's a couple of real nice little meadows there, and I put her out on that and went up and crawled in the sleeping bag, and I thought, well, this is not going to be too bad. About 2 hours later, here comes the bells up the trail, and I get up and run down the trail and chase them back, and I had to do that about 4 times every night, And I'm glad nobody had a camera up there because I was pretty white and didn't bother putting any clothes on. Just my cowboy boots because I can't run in barefoot. But at any rate, I'd run them back. And I did that all summer, that summer in 57. And then in 58, we went in and did about the same thing. And I was pretty used to it by then. But a lot of times we'd get them out. Everybody would be out fishing. I wouldn't have nothing to do in camp. I cut out all the firewood they needed and cleaned up all of the guest tents. And then I just have nothing to do. So Tom says, "Go ahead, you can ride down in your camp and catch a nap." So I rode down there one day and caught a nap in that tent. And not very long. I thought, geez, I can't sleep. This is a daylight yet. And it was about 3 o'clock. So I thought, well, I'll just explore this country. So I got on Keno and rode her around the meadows there and into one meadow, big meadow, up towards the trail where it climbed the hill, went over Huckleberry Pass, and by God, I saw blazes on the tree. And does everybody know what a Forest Service blaze is? It's an upside down exclamation mark, and that is only Forest Service employees are allowed to use that. And that particular blaze is registered in the Library of Congress. But anyway, I looked up the trail, up the hill there, and I saw 3 dashes cut into a tree. And what the heck is that? And they were real high. Geez, they were about 7 or 8 feet off the ground. I thought, boy, whoever did that was really tall. I said, maybe it's Bigfoot. So anyway, I rode up to that blaze, and I looked up the trail, or up the hill a ways, and I could see 3 more. And I got up there a little further. Then I realized what was happening. Whoever put those blazes in were standing on snow, probably 4 and 5 feet deep, on snowshoes, and put those marks in there. But anyway, I kept following these trails on the east side of Bugle Mountain. And I followed them for quite a ways, about 1.5 miles, 2 miles, slowly going up the east side, or the west side of Bugle Mountain. The east side is pretty steep, but the west side is kind of gradual with a lot of big boulders in it and that kind of stuff. Kept riding up there and seeing these blazes, and I'd follow another one and go up there a little further. I got to the top of that one of those blazes ended up with 2 blazes real quick right there. And I started to look around, and here's a tailing where a mine, somebody had mined there and dumped all the dirt out there on the flat. And as I looked around, there was a broken wheelbarrow wheel and some tin cans, of course, a broken coffee pot, and a skillet that had a big chip out of it. And you could tell it was a mine. The dirt was completely different, and it was pretty flat there. So I tied up Keno, and I looked around a little bit and couldn't see any mine, not even any sign of it. But I did look over against the mountainside, and I did see a mock orange bush. Does everybody know what mock orange is? It's a white flower that looks like an orange blossom, and it was first discovered and identified in Hellgate Canyon by Lewis and Clark, and they put it in their albums. And that's kind of how Missoula really, I always give Missoula really credit for having the first mock orange bush. Anyway, I saw this mock orange bush over against the hill there, and I went over and parted the branches a little bit. By golly, there's a hole. There's a cave there. And it was only about that high. And I went over and got my axe off my saddle and cut that bush out of the way so I could see more. And I thought, well, that's a mine. This sure as heck. The front end is caved in a little bit. So I got on my belly and crawled in. And I crawled in about, from here to that post, maybe a little further. And of course, it got dark right away, real dark. And I thought, geez, this isn't going to work. I better go get a flashlight. So I backed out, went over to my horse, and got my flashlight out of my saddlebag, and come over. And it was one of those lights, you have to turn it to get it turned on. And we didn't have those headlamps and all that kind of stuff, Anyway, I thought, well, how am I going to carry this and crawl in there? So I put it in my mouth and started in. And I crawled in to about that post, and it got pretty dark. And I thought, well, I'll crawl another 10 feet or so and then turn it on, because the cave was about this way to start. But as it got in there, it got a little higher, not much, but a little bit. And I could see where somebody had used a pick and a shovel in there. So anyway, when it got so dark I couldn't see anymore, I took the flashlight, turned it on. What a surprise. The inside of that cave was full of daddy long-legged spiders. And I mean, I was laying in them. They were strung. They were hanging in 2 and 3 from the roof. They were in my hair, in my ear. They were in my shirt, everything. Have you ever tried to crawl backwards real fast? It's very difficult. That's the hardest thing. Try it sometime. You can go forward pretty good, but boy, backing up, there's no way you can go. You're stuck. But at any rate, I backed out of the mine, and of course, stripped down and shook all my clothes. My golly, I had daddy long legs everywhere. And I left that mine from that time on. I haven't been back there since. But there's a mine on that mountain. By the way, that mountain, Bugle Mountain, is well known for copper in particular. And about 2 or 3 years after I went into that cave, about in 1961, 61, we would hear a helicopter fly over our camp at Meadow Creek Lake, and it would land on the top of the mountain. What's this? And they would fly 2 and 3 trips every day up there. What the heck's going on? Finally, Tom says, well, I think they've discovered a mine up there. They're going to build a mine up there. So they flew in there, and they flew these little Bell helicopters, which couldn't carry a heck of a lot. They'd carry shovels and a little plywood. Every once in a while, we'd see them carrying 2 sheets on each side. That's 4 sheets altogether in one trip. But anyway, they were flying out of Lincoln, out of the airfield there at Lincoln. And they would fly in there, and they were building a mine up there. And they actually ran a hose, 2-inch hose down at the bottom, and narrowed it down to 3/4 and down to 1 inch, and then down to a 1/2 inch at the top. And they had 4 pumps on that mountain to pump the water out of Minor Creek, and they would pump it up and pump it up there to run their camp. And they built a camp with plywood, and I mean they had buildings there. They would house about 4 men in each one, and I think they had probably 8, maybe 10 or 12 people up there at a time. And they would fly them in from Lincoln, and they were looking for how to establish a mining claim. And of course, this is before 1964. So they were looking to establish a mining claim there before any wilderness got established. So anyway, they flew in there quite a lot, and they even flew a D2 Caterpillar in there in pieces. And a D2, you can't imagine. That buffalo is bigger than a D2. It's not very big, but it had a blade on it. And what they did is they went all over the top of the mountain there and would dig holes just deep enough so they could get the ore samples and send them out of there. And that mining company was the Bear Creek Mining Company, and they were owned by Kennecott, the copper people. But at any rate, that's one of the stories that's up on Bugle Mountain. Yep. A little bit more? Oh, all right. Let me think of one.
Or we do questions, that's fine.
Yeah. Yeah. Does anybody have any questions? Ask questions if anybody has a question. Yeah.
Any Howard stories?
Howard Copenhaver? Oh, yeah. Lots of them. Yeah. Howard and I worked together for many years. Matter of fact, I consider him my father because I stayed out here from Ohio and I never went back to see my family at all. And so Howard was my dad. And Howard and I did a lot of things together. Howard, every time he went to hunting camp, it was kind of interesting. He would put on a pair of long handles underwear, red to boot. So every night, we'd go to crawl in bed, and the rest of us would take off our clothes and our wool pants and all that stuff. Here's Howard with his red underwear. Yeah. Howard did a lot of hunting in the Bob Marshall at Bar Creek. He had a good camp there at Bar Creek. I remember that very well. He had a lot of hunters in there. One year we had a group of hunters we took in, and we were going to bring the camp out at the end of the trip. And so we took a lot of extra mules, and we turned them loose out on the meadows there in Danaher. And Howard took the hunters out hunting because he says, you start tearing the tents down. So that's what I did. I tore down the tents. And one of those tents hit me on the shoulder real bad, the ridgepole. And I rubbed it in with good liniment and kept on working. And finally, it came to about the last day of the trip. And I was rubbing this liniment on me, on my shoulder, so I could sleep at night real well. So I rubbed it on, and I was a cook, so I cooked the meal and finished the meal, did the dishes, and Howard, he said, let's go to bed. And so get to bed early, we can get up early and get after it. So we went to bed, and one guy didn't go to bed. He stayed up. He says, can I put a pan of hot water on the stove? Sure. Go ahead. So he put a pan of hot water on the stove because he was really sore from riding. And I mean really sore. Howard rode him all over the valley there, and he was really sore. So he started to rub himself in with liniment. And I was using this Bengay, and that stuff, the white cream that helps you a little bit maybe. But at any rate, I was using it. And I was sleeping pretty close to the kitchen and the stove. And this guy was taking care of himself. And about the second big gob of that, he'd rub it on his shoulder and on his legs and backside. I squeezed my Bengay in that container and pulled it back and pretended like I was sleeping yet. Man, he rubbed that on himself, and away he went. He was a heavy-set man, and he stood up straight, I mean really straight. And he said, oh, my God. And he ran out to the creek and was standing in Bar Creek, breaking the ice. and splashing himself with ice cold water. So, but Howard and I, we laughed about that for forever. And we got a good kick out of that. So, and by the way, he never had hemorrhoids again. Ever. So now, does anybody else have any questions that maybe I can answer? The Bob Marshall is a great place to go, and it's we got to keep it. I hope we can keep it, and that's what we're hoping now with the new government we have. Yes.
Well, that was just what I was going to ask about. Of course, you talk about the challenge to the roses.
Yeah, boy, there's a big challenge to it. Yeah, we had, I was spent 3 hours on a Zoom meeting, which I hate. I like, when I talk to somebody, I want to talk to them eyeball to eyeball. I don't like to talk, to a machine, and you have to fiddle around with a little thing that jumps around there. I don't like that at all. But anyway, we had a meeting this afternoon with the Montana Conservation Elders, and we're trying to figure out a way to get that so that we can make sure we have it. And it looks like the roadless rule may very well be eliminated. We tried everything, and one of the members of the Montana Conservation Elders, he looked up everything on the AI. And don't believe everything it says. Right off. And I'll tell you, it really didn't make any real good sense how to keep it roadless. And when I wrote to Senator Daines, I wrote to him about a week and a half ago, and I told him, I said, listen, we have to set that aside. We have to keep the roadless rule, because the last 4 or 5 generations of people in the world have made most of the land management decisions, even some of them in space. And I said, my grandson and my granddaughters, they can use a computer like nobody's business, and they can use one of these things sitting beside me and one that's blinking over there now and then. They can use it a lot better than I can. And I said, I think they'll have better ways to manage roadless ground, and so that they'll have something to manage. If we keep managing them like now, if the roadless rule disappears, we won't have any open space hardly at all. I think it'll take a lot away from the wilderness and the backcountry. So yes, we're working on it as hard as we can, and we're trying to do what we can. But and by the way, I signed 4 books today to all our representatives, and I told them, hey, take a good look at that roadless rule, because if you go against it, you're going against the next generation and probably the generation after that. If it's ruined, it'll be gone forever. And in 1964, I testified in Great Falls before a guy by the name of Mansfield, Mike, and on the Wilderness Act of *64. And Tom Edwards, by the way, drugged me over there. Him and Howard Copenhaver. They put me in an international truck, and we drove over to Great Falls and went into the courthouse where the meeting was held. And they just kind of grabbed a hold of my ear and led me in there. And everybody signed up, and they started speaking to the senators and to Mike Mansfield and Lee Metcalf, and they were talking to them quite frequently. And finally, everybody, they'd call a name, and the guy'd get up and give a talk, a little short talk. And then finally I heard, Smoke Elser. I don't know who that is. I didn't know I was signed up, but Tom had signed me up there. So I went up and I said, what do you want to know? I said, yes, I like wilderness. But I said, I plan on making my living there. And I've made a living in the Bob Marshall for 55 years, actually 57. And made it well enough that I could send a couple of daughters to Europe and buy them a brand new car when they got out of high school. And not only that, but the best thing about it is I got to share the wilderness with other people and interpret it. these people were from Minneapolis and, you know, all over the place, in California and Florida and everywhere else. And when they get on a horse and start down the trail, and I start telling them about spruce trees and Douglas fir and ponderosa pine, and they can catch native trout in the first creek that we camp at, that means a lot to them. And I identify all the plants. That was my job. So, thank you. Any other questions? Now remember, we got to save that road list. And we have to save our wilderness study areas. Even though we have studied them for 30 years, and surely we've studied them enough, but maybe not enough yet. So we got to save our wilderness areas, and we need to study each one with the people that are around it, instead of somebody in California or somebody in New York or somebody in Vermont that wants to take it away. Thank you.
We do one or two more questions.
Yep.
And then there's book signing.
Yep.
Over here.
Just in the years that you've been there, what have you seen change? And I can imagine some obvious things, but maybe even some of the less obvious.
Yeah, at first when I started in there in the 55 and 60, 65, 70, no backpackers. Too far to walk. And a backpacker at that time didn't have the kind of shoes it needed and didn't have the kind of light equipment. But as time went on, they got lighter equipment, as you know, and better shoes to wear in the hills. And we see quite a few more hikers. And that's good. That's a good thing. Every time I met a hiker on the trail, I always stopped and got off my horse. I hate to look down and talk to somebody, and I think that makes them feel small. And I didn't want to do that. So, but anyway, that was one of the major changes. Now it's kind of reversed. There used to be about 30 outfitters in there in the summer. Now there's almost, I think there's probably 10 in the summer, and probably 20 in the hunting season. But the hunting season in the Bob Marshall isn't very good anymore, mainly because we've had a lot of fires. About 75% of the Bob Marshall has burned now. Yeah, it's a lot of black country. And when you go in there now in the summer, you ride through the black, like going up the North Fork of the Blackfoot. It's all black all the way up and up Dry Fork. And that makes it pretty difficult to interpret the country. But because all that vegetation is gone that you can't tell them about. Yes?
So you were telling the story about Lee Metcalf and Mike Mansfield and stuff. Do you see, I mean, they're just such visionaries,
Yes.
you know, of their time. Do you see anybody on the landscape right now that has kind of that level of vision?
No.
No. Okay.
That's it. Yes.
Did you make any impact with Danes when you explained the situation?
To who? Danes? You know, for about 3 weeks, I never got an answer. And he did answer, and he said, I'm going to stick to what I believe in. And he said, I believe in getting rid of all wild wilderness areas. And that's his big belief. And and she's the same way. Worse, yes, because she doesn't even know what it looks like. Danes at least has been in there a few times. But you know, years ago, I took Mac Baucus in the hills many times, and I took a guy by the name of Ted Kennedy in the hills quite a few times in the early days when he was convincible and not so big. He got pretty big lately in the last years. And then the other person I took in a lot was the president's son. Steve Ford actually worked for me for 2 years. Yeah, Steve Ford. Yeah. Okay. Yep.
I asked Eva if she had some closing comments.
Yes, she does.
I do.
Yeah, she does. She always does.
Oh, really? Well, I think it's important that we have the next generation getting more involved, and that's why I teach the wilderness policy and packing class at the university. That's why we have a group from the Natural History Center, all girls this summer. It was so fun to teach them how to pack and get out there. And there's no bad way to go out in the wilderness and enjoy yourselves. And sometimes you don't even have to go in wilderness. You can also go out in our wonderful public lands around here. But I think that's kind of what Smoke has been doing, and we have all been trying to do more of, is just to get more people involved and out there and exposed and to really see what's out there to protect. So.
Yeah, it's kind of neat in the spring. Teachers are tired of teaching, and a lot of times I'll bring the kids up to the barn, and I get a chance to talk to them.
Yeah.
And that's really fun. I mean, I've had little kids that couldn't even lift the packs. We'd have to set a chair beside the mule and lift the kid up on the chair, and then I'd lift the pack up and hold it, and they would tie the knot. And that's
really fun.
benefiting to me.
Yeah. So if you know anybody who wants to learn how to pack, get in touch.
Yep, get in touch. And I've got one lady here who says she's got 6. Yep, and we'll do that, no problem. Okay. And I can do it a 2-day or a 1-day or a week. It doesn't make any difference.
Well, thank you for sharing.
Yeah.